A little etching here.
Yes.
Just like the last spot that I had around
Plastic
here.
surgery was meant to fix small flaws, but for some, it became an obsession with no limits. One procedure turned into dozens. Faces were rebuilt, bodies reshaped, and warnings ignored. Doctors said stop. Reality said stop. They didn't listen. These are the shocking stories of 10 bizarre people who took plastic surgery too far, where transformation crossed the line into obsession and sometimes tragedy. Valeria. For most little girls, Barbie is just a toy. A plastic fantasy that gets left behind with childhood. But for Valeria Lukyanova, Barbie was never something to grow out of. It was something to become. Born in Ukraine, Valeria didn't just admire the doll, she studied it. The flawless skin, the exaggerated eyes, the impossible proportions. Over time, admiration turned into imitation, and imitation turned into transformation. Valeria spent around $30,000 on cosmetic procedures to sculpt herself into what many now call a real-life Barbie doll. Her appearance is striking and unsettling all at once. Large glassy eyes that seem permanently widened, a perfectly smooth symmetrical face, long blonde hair that completes the illusion. Valeria claims she looks almost the same as she did at 14, insisting that surgery played only a small role, though few who see her believe that. To maintain her doll-like figure, Valeria follows extreme habits. She has openly stated that she survives mainly on fruit juice, keeping her body unnaturally thin to match Barbie's proportions. While millions online labeled her Human Barbie, Valeria rejected the nickname, calling it insulting and misunderstood. Yet the name stuck, and so did the fame. Her look turned her into an internet sensation. Thousands followed her online, debating whether she was beautiful, disturbing, or something in between. Some praised her as a living work of art. Others accused her of promoting unrealistic and dangerous beauty standards. Valeria Lukyanova didn't just change her body, she turned herself into a symbol. A symbol of how far fantasy can go when reality feels insufficient. Whether seen as mesmerizing or unnatural, one thing is certain: Valeria didn't try to look human. She tried to look perfect, even if that perfection was made of plastic. Cindy Jackson. People choose plastic surgery for many reasons. Some want to enhance their beauty, others want to fix what they believe nature got wrong. But Cindy Jackson's story doesn't begin in a mirror, it begins with loss. At just 21 years old, Cindy lost her father, and with that loss came an inheritance. That money became her entry point into a world most people never experience. Cindy was never satisfied with her natural appearance, and unlike most, she had the financial freedom to change it. What started as a single decision soon turned into a pattern. One surgery became two. Two turned into 10. Before anyone could stop to question it, Cindy Jackson had gone under the knife 52 times. Her transformations included multiple nose jobs, a chin reduction, several facelifts, and eyelid liposuction, each procedure pushing her closer to the image she believed was perfection. To the outside world, it looked excessive, even disturbing. But to Cindy, it wasn't obsession, it was control. Every operation was a calculated step toward taking ownership of her appearance, reshaping not just her face, but her identity. Today, Cindy is recognized as one of the most surgically altered women in history. In a surprising turn, she now advises others on cosmetic procedures, teaching what she calls perfect natural-looking surgery. Natural after 52 operations. Her face is no longer just a reflection in the mirror, but a carefully engineered result of grief money and an unwavering desire to reinvent herself. Sahar Tabar. Sahar Tabar was just a normal teenager from Iran, until one day the internet met her new face and everything changed. At only 19 years old, Sahar shocked millions after revealing that she had undergone over 50 cosmetic procedures in an attempt to resemble her idol Angelina Jolie. But surgery alone wasn't enough. Sahar combined plastic surgery, extreme makeup, heavy photo editing, and drastic weight loss to create a look that felt more like a horror movie than Hollywood glamour. Before the transformation, Sahar looked like any other teenage girl. After it, her face became unrecognizable. Sunken cheeks, sharply sculpted cheekbones, a pointed nose, pale skin, and piercing eyes enhanced by blue contact lenses. To complete the illusion, she reportedly lost more than 40 kilograms in just a few months, pushing her body to dangerous limits. Her photos spread rapidly across social media. Some viewers were fascinated, others were disturbed. Comments ranged from admiration to outright cruelty, with critics calling her appearance zombie-like. But attention kept growing. Sahar gained tens of thousands of followers, turning shock into visibility and visibility into online fame. Sahar insisted her look was a form of self-expression and that she used technology, makeup, and surgery to achieve it. Her dream: to one day become a Hollywood actress just like Angelina Jolie. Sahar Tabar's story isn't just about extreme plastic surgery. It's about how social media can reward the most shocking transformations, especially when youth insecurity and fame collide. In chasing the face of a celebrity, Sahar became something else entirely, a viral symbol of how far people will go to be seen. Ann Bolton. Most people turn to plastic surgery to fight time, to erase wrinkles, and to look younger. Ann Bolton did the exact opposite. At 47 years old, she found herself trapped in an unexpected problem. She looked far younger than her age. Strangers constantly mistook her for someone much younger. Men half her age approached her, and people often assumed her own son was her boyfriend. What initially sounded flattering slowly became humiliating. Her youthful appearance turned into a social barrier. Friends began to distance themselves, admitting that standing next to Ann made them feel old. Relationships failed, and Ann grew increasingly isolated, not because she looked unattractive, but because she didn't look her age. Eventually, Ann made a decision that shocked everyone. Instead of Botox, she chose reverse Botox. She deliberately underwent cosmetic procedures designed to add wrinkles, soften her youthful features, and make her appear older. Lines most people spend thousands of dollars trying to erase were carefully introduced into her face. To outsiders, the choice seemed irrational, even disturbing. But to Ann, it was a way to reclaim her identity. She didn't want attention or confusion. She wanted to be seen for who she truly was: a middle-aged woman, a mother, and an equal among her peers. In a world obsessed with staying young, Ann Bolton's story stands as a quiet rebellion, proving that plastic surgery isn't always about vanity, but sometimes about being recognized as yourself. If it were you, would you choose plastic surgery to make yourself look older? Comment 1 if you would, and 0 if you wouldn't. Xiao Qing. In 2010, the 21-year-old from China went through a painful breakup. Desperate to win her boyfriend back, she focused on one detail she couldn't ignore. His favorite actress was Jessica Alba. And in Xiao Qing's mind, that wasn't trivia. It was a plan. She decided that if she could look like Jessica Alba, maybe she could become irresistible again. What followed was a drastic makeover. Xiao Qing bleached her skin, dyed her hair blonde, underwent double eyelid surgery, and reshaped her nose and lips to match Alba's features. The transformation wasn't subtle, it was intentional, calculated, and fueled by emotional desperation. She even admitted that before the breakup, her ex had given her a blonde wig and asked her to wear it, constantly planting the seed for everything that came next. Despite all the surgeries, the time, and the money, the plan failed. Her ex-boyfriend never returned. Later, Xiao Qing openly admitted she was psychologically fragile and felt a constant need to be in a relationship. The surgeries didn't heal the breakup, they only made it more visible. Today, she remains single, a reminder that no amount of cosmetic change can force love back into existence. Xiao Qing's story isn't about vanity or fame, it's about vulnerability, about how rejection can push someone to erase themselves piece by piece in hopes of becoming someone worthy of being loved again. Ethan Bramble. For Ethan Bramble, obsession didn't start in adulthood, it started in childhood. At just 11 years old, Ethan became fascinated with tattoos, and that curiosity slowly evolved into something far more extreme. By the time he turned 20, his body was no longer just skin and bone, it was a project in progress shaped by nearly 40 surgical procedures. Almost every part of Ethan's body was transformed. His skin was covered in tattoos from head to toe, but ink alone wasn't enough. At 22 years old, he made a decision that stunned even seasoned body modification fans. Ethan had his belly button surgically removed simply because he didn't want one anymore. The risks only escalated from there. Despite the very real possibility of blindness, Ethan chose to have his eyeballs tattooed, allowing a syringe to pierce his eyes for the sake of appearance. He also split his tongue and surgically altered his ears, cutting away nearly half of each one. Each modification pushed him further away from what society considers normal. To the outside world, Ethan's appearance is shocking, even frightening. But to him, it's no different from putting on makeup or dyeing hair. He sees his body as a human drawing board and every scar, tattoo, and surgical change as an expression of personal freedom. In Ethan Bramble's world, the body isn't something you're born with, it's something you choose to create. Hang Myoku. Hang Myoku was once considered beautiful, a young South Korean woman with soft features and a face that fit perfectly into her country's strict beauty standards. But for Hang, beauty was never enough. One surgery didn't bring satisfaction, it opened a door she would never be able to close. It started innocently, a cosmetic procedure meant to improve her appearance. The result pleased her, but only briefly. Soon she wanted more. Fuller cheeks, smoother skin, a more perfect face. Hang kept returning to clinics asking for additional injections, additional surgeries, additional changes. Over time, doctors began to notice something alarming. Her requests were no longer reasonable. They weren't medical, they were compulsive. Eventually, surgeons refused to operate on her any longer, warning that her face had already suffered severe damage. But Hang Myoku didn't stop. She couldn't. Cut off from professional care, she took matters into her own hands, and that's when the story turned tragic. Desperate to keep her face swollen and full, Hang began injecting cooking oil into her own face using syringes. Not medical fillers, not silicone. Ordinary household oil. Her skin reacted violently. Her face ballooned, hardened, and became grotesquely distorted. The smooth beauty she once chased was replaced by a mask of pain and irreversible damage. By the time the public became aware of her condition, Hang Myoku was almost unrecognizable. Her face was permanently disfigured. Speaking became difficult. Living normally became impossible. Emergency surgeries were later performed not to enhance her looks, but simply to remove some of the oil and reduce the swelling. The damage, however, could never be fully undone. Hang Myoku's story isn't about vanity, it's about addiction. About what happens when the pursuit of perfection crosses the line into psychological collapse. Her face didn't change because of plastic surgery alone. It changed because no one stopped the obsession in time. In a world where beauty is praised endlessly, Hang Myoku became a haunting warning. When perfection is treated like a necessity instead of an illusion, the cost can be everything. Pixie Fox. Pixie Fox never dreamed of becoming beautiful in the human sense. Beauty to her was artificial, smooth, exaggerated, unreal. From the very beginning, Pixie was obsessed with the idea of becoming a living doll, something closer to a cartoon character than a real person. She didn't want to resemble women around her. She wanted to erase every trace of humanity from her appearance. To achieve the sharp, animated face she imagined, Pixie traveled to South Korea, one of the world's plastic surgery capitals. Their surgeons performed an extreme procedure that involved breaking and reshaping her jaw. The pain was brutal. The recovery lasted nearly 12 months. For an entire year, Pixie lived with swelling, restricted movement, and constant discomfort. But she believed suffering was simply the price of transformation. Then came the surgery that shocked the world. In 2015, Pixie voluntarily had 6 ribs surgically removed in her pursuit of the tiniest waist on the planet. It was a permanent, irreversible decision, one that altered not just her appearance but the structure of her body forever. Breathing became harder. Physical limits increased, but to Pixie, the visual result mattered more than function. The list of procedures kept growing: liposuction on her thighs, breast implants, a butt lift, a brow lift, and permanent makeup etched into her face. By her own admission, Pixie has undergone more than 200 plastic surgeries. Each operation pushed her further away from her former self and deeper into the fantasy she was determined to live inside. Eventually, even surgeons began to refuse her. Doctors who once agreed to operate warned that her body had been pushed too far, that continuing could be fatal. Pixie had reached a point where medical ethics collided with obsession, and the doctors stepped away. To the public, Pixie Fox is often seen as shocking, extreme, even tragic. But in her own mind, she didn't lose herself, she completed herself. Piece by piece, bone by bone, Pixie Fox sculpted her body into a living cartoon, proving just how far someone is willing to go when reality is no longer enough. Jocelyn Wildenstein. Jocelyn Wildenstein lived a life most people can only imagine. Private jets, Manhattan penthouses, unlimited money. But behind the luxury was a fear far more powerful than poverty, the fear of being left behind. Born in Switzerland and later becoming a New York socialite, Jocelyn married billionaire art dealer Alec Wildenstein. Their marriage placed her at the center of extreme wealth and high society. But as the relationship began to fracture, Jocelyn became convinced of one thing: if she could stay beautiful forever, she could keep her husband forever. So she turned to plastic surgery. At first, the changes were subtle: a lift here, a tweak there. But over time, the procedures multiplied. Jocelyn spent millions of dollars reshaping her face, tightening skin, altering her eyes, lifting her cheeks. She reportedly wanted a feline appearance, believing her husband admired big cats. The transformation became impossible to ignore. Her features grew sharper, tighter, more exaggerated. The press gave her a nickname that would follow her for decades: Catwoman. Once a symbol of glamour, Jocelyn became a global spectacle, photographed, mocked, and endlessly discussed. Ironically, the surgeries didn't save the marriage. The couple divorced in one of the most expensive divorces in history. Jocelyn walked away with an enormous financial settlement, but the damage to her face and her public image was permanent. To some, Jocelyn Wildenstein is a cautionary tale of excess. To others, she's a woman who used her wealth to chase control in a life slipping away. But at the heart of her story is a simple truth: even billions of dollars can't guarantee love, and no amount of surgery can stop time. Jocelyn didn't just lose her husband, she lost the face the world once knew. And in trying to freeze beauty forever, she became a living reminder of what happens when fear, power, and obsession collide. Vanilla Chamu. Vanilla Chamu was born human, but she wanted to become something else entirely. A living French doll. Pale skin, delicate features, perfect proportions. Not a fantasy in her mind, but a physical goal she believed surgery could make real. Her transformation began in 2013 when she started aggressively bleaching her skin in pursuit of a more Caucasian porcelain doll appearance. What followed was a cascade of cosmetic procedures, each one taking her further away from her natural self and deeper into her obsession. Vanilla ultimately underwent over 30 cosmetic surgeries, spending more than $100,000 along the way. The procedures were extensive: 2 breast implants, eyelash implants, liposuction, and even dimple creation, a surgery designed to permanently carve charm into her face. Every detail was calculated, every feature sculpted to resemble something artificial rather than organic. But her most shocking desire went beyond beauty, it challenged biology itself. Vanilla wanted to be taller. Refusing to accept her natural height, she pursued one of the most painful and controversial procedures in modern medicine: limb lengthening surgery. A brutal process that involves breaking bones and slowly stretching them over months, often accompanied by extreme pain and lifelong complications. To most people, this was where the fantasy crossed into danger. But to Vanilla Chamu, it was simply another step toward perfection. She believed that if the body could be changed, then nothing about identity was fixed. Her story isn't just about plastic surgery, it's about the illusion that with enough money, pain, and determination, reality itself can be edited. And Vanilla Chamu was willing to pay any price to prove it. Hit like if you found these stories shocking, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you want to see more. Andrea Ivanova. Andrea Ivanova didn't want to look like a celebrity. She didn't want to look like a doll. Her goal was simpler and far more extreme. She wanted to be the woman with the biggest lips in the world. From Bulgaria, Andrea began injecting lip fillers again and again, chasing size rather than symmetry. One procedure quickly became dozens. As her lips swelled far beyond natural proportions, doctors started warning her to stop. Some refused to continue altogether, citing serious health risks. Andrea ignored them. She kept going. With each injection, everyday life became harder. Eating was difficult. Speaking was strained. Even basic facial movement came with discomfort. Still, Andrea insisted the pain was worth it. To her, bigger meant better, and attention was proof that it was working. Andrea openly admitted she didn't care about medical advice or public criticism. She wasn't trying to look beautiful by conventional standards. She wanted to stand out, to be impossible to ignore. In a world ruled by social media, her lips became her identity and her brand. Online reactions were brutal and divided. Some called her shocking, others called her disturbing, a few called her brave. But Andrea saw only one thing: visibility. Every comment, every stare, every headline confirmed that she had achieved what she wanted to be noticed. Andrea Ivanova's story isn't about imitation or fantasy. It's about escalation. About how when attention becomes the goal, there is no finish line, bigger is never enough, and the body becomes the price paid for relevance in a world that rewards extremes. Toby Sheldon. For most fans, admiration stops at posters, playlists, and concert tickets. For Toby Sheldon, it went much further. His obsession with pop star Justin Bieber crossed a line from inspiration into identity. Toby didn't just want to look like Bieber, he wanted to be him. And to make that happen, he turned to plastic surgery, again and again. His entire face was surgically reconfigured multiple times: his jaw, his cheekbones, his lips, each procedure bringing him closer to the image he worshipped. When his transformation became public, the backlash was brutal. People mocked him, criticized him, and questioned his sanity. Why would someone permanently alter their face just to resemble a celebrity? But none of it seemed to matter to Toby. He had already gone too far to turn back. Believing fame would follow his new appearance, Toby tried to launch a music career of his own. But reality was unforgiving. His songs failed to gain traction, and his dream of stardom collapsed under public scrutiny and disappointment. The fame he chased never came. In 2015, Toby Sheldon was found dead in a motel room in California. The cause believed to be multiple drug intoxication. Some blamed the failure of his music career. Others pointed to the emotional fallout from a recent breakup with his boyfriend. The truth remains blurred, but the ending is undeniable. Toby Sheldon didn't just change his face, he erased himself. His story stands as a haunting reminder of what can happen when admiration turns into obsession and identity is sacrificed in the pursuit of someone else's life. Jessica Alves. Rodrigo Alves didn't grow up dreaming of fame. He grew up being bullied, mocked for his looks, targeted at school, and constantly reminded that he didn't fit in. Rodrigo became obsessed with one idea: if he could look perfect, the pain would stop. And in his mind, perfection had a name: Ken. What followed was a transformation few could comprehend. Rodrigo poured nearly $1 million into plastic surgery, chasing the smooth skin, sharp jawline, and sculpted body of the iconic doll. His face became a construction site. The most extreme focus was his nose: more than 10 nose surgeries, each one riskier than the last. At one point, the damage was so severe that Rodrigo could no longer breathe through his nose, forced to rely solely on his mouth just to survive. But even that wasn't enough to make him stop. Determined to perfect every inch of his body, Rodrigo went in for another surgery, this time to make his arms appear more muscular. The procedure went wrong. Horribly wrong. He was left partially paralyzed, and doctors warned him he could lose his arms entirely. For a moment, the dream nearly cost him everything. Against the odds, Rodrigo survived. And after years of surgeries, pain, and public scrutiny, another truth emerged, one deeper than the obsession with Ken. Rodrigo came forward and revealed that he identified as a woman beginning a new chapter of life as Jessica Alves. The Ken doll was never the final destination. It was a mask, a shield, a way to survive years of insecurity and self-hatred. Jessica Alves' story isn't just about plastic surgery taken too far, it's about identity trauma and the extreme lengths someone will go to in order to feel whole. What began as an attempt to become a doll ended as a revelation. The body can be rebuilt, reshaped, and redesigned, but the deepest transformation happens when the truth finally comes out. Eric Sprague. Eric Sprague never believed he was meant to look like everyone else. While most people spend their lives trying to fit in, Eric was convinced he was born in the wrong form. Deep down, he didn't see himself as human, he saw himself as something mythological. That belief drove him to an extreme transformation. Over the years, Eric endured more than 700 hours of tattooing, covering his entire body in green, scale-like patterns to resemble a lizard. The process was slow, painful, and irreversible, but for Eric, pain was irrelevant compared to purpose. Tattoos weren't enough. To complete the illusion, he underwent body modification surgeries that most people would never consider. His tongue was surgically split, allowing it to flick like a reptile's. He also had implants placed above his eyebrows, reshaping his face into something sharper, more animalistic, and undeniably unsettling. To outsiders, Eric Sprague became known as the Lizard Man, a spectacle, a curiosity. But to Eric himself, this wasn't performance art or rebellion, it was alignment. He believed his physical form now reflected his true identity, a being that existed somewhere between human and legend. Eric Sprague didn't modify his body to shock the world. He did it to feel real inside it. And in doing so, he erased the line between self-expression and transformation, becoming not just a man with tattoos, but a living myth walking among humans. Herbert Chavez. For Herbert Chavez, Superman was never just a comic book character. He wasn't a symbol or a childhood fantasy. To Herbert, Superman was an ideal strength, perfection, invincibility. And over time, admiration turned into obsession. Living in the Philippines, Herbert began dressing like the Man of Steel almost every day. But wearing the costume wasn't enough. He wanted the face, the body, the illusion that Superman had stepped out of fiction and into real life. So he turned to plastic surgery. Herbert underwent more than 20 cosmetic procedures. His nose was reshaped repeatedly, his jaw was realigned, his skin was lightened. He even had abdominal implants inserted in an attempt to recreate Superman's famous abs of steel. Each surgery brought him closer to the image he worshipped and further away from the man he once was. At first, Herbert believed the surgeries were a success. He proudly wore Superman's cape in public, convinced he had finally become what he was meant to be. But the obsession didn't stop. When he wanted even more dramatic abdominal definition, doctors refused to operate. What they discovered was alarming. Herbert had been injecting himself with toxic fillers, dangerous substances never meant to be inside the human body. The revelation forced surgeons to cut him off completely, warning that any further procedures could be fatal. Herbert Chavez didn't gain superpowers. He didn't become invincible. Instead, his story exposes something far more human, the desperate desire to escape reality and replace it with a fantasy strong enough to drown out insecurity. In trying to become Superman, Herbert Chavez revealed just how fragile the human need to feel extraordinary can be. Dennis Avner. It's one thing to want to look better, it's another thing to want to stop looking human altogether. Dennis Avner didn't dream of resembling a celebrity, a model, or an idealized version of himself. His goal was far more extreme. Dennis wanted to become a tiger. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, physically. His transformation began in his early 20s with cat-like facial tattoos, subtle at first, almost experimental. But over time, the changes escalated. Dennis committed to a series of 14 major surgical procedures, each one pushing him further away from humanity and closer to the animal he believed he was meant to be. His nose was flattened and reshaped. His brow was surgically altered. Cheek and forehead implants were inserted to create a feline bone structure. His ears were modified to appear pointed. His upper lip was split. Every change was deliberate, calculated, and irreversible, designed to mimic the face of a tiger as closely as possible. What most people never knew was that behind the tattoos and implants, Dennis Avner lived a quiet, disciplined life. He was a former U.S. Navy veteran, a stark contrast to the wild appearance he later embraced. To Dennis, the tiger wasn't a costume, it was his spiritual identity. He believed the surgeries didn't transform him into something new, but rather revealed what had always been there. To the public, he became known as Stalking Cat, a spectacle, a curiosity, a symbol of how far body modification could go. But behind the image was a man living on the edge of isolation, misunderstood, and often alone. In 2012, Dennis Avner was found dead in his apartment in Nevada. Authorities ruled his death a suicide. The man who had spent his life trying to embody the strength and power of a predator met an ending painfully human. Dennis Avner's story isn't just about extreme body modification. It's about identity taken to its breaking point, about what happens when the desire to escape humanity becomes stronger than the ability to live within it. Ability to live within it. Ability to live within it. What if the pursuit of beauty could completely destroy the face you once loved? In this video, we reveal 18 shocking celebrity surgeries that went terribly wrong, turning iconic looks into unrecognizable transformations. From subtle changes to extreme makeovers, these before and after stories will leave you stunned. Stay until the end because some of these transformations in 2026 are almost impossible to believe. Donatella Versace. There was a time when her presence alone could define an entire era of fashion, but what happened next turned her face into one of the most debated transformations in the world. Donatella Versace rose to global prominence after the tragic loss of her brother Gianni Versace, stepping into a spotlight that was both powerful and unforgiving. In the early days, she represented a striking kind of Italian beauty, bold, refined, and effortlessly commanding. But behind the glamour, the pressure to maintain that image in a ruthless industry began to take its toll. It didn't happen overnight. At first, the changes were almost invisible: a slightly slimmer nose, a smoother complexion, a more perfect version of herself. But as the years passed, those subtle enhancements evolved into something far more dramatic. Multiple rhinoplasties reshaped her features. Facelifts tightened her skin to an almost unnatural degree, and fillers added volume to her lips and cheekbones, pushing her appearance beyond its original identity. The transformation was gradual until suddenly it wasn't. And then came the reaction. The fashion world couldn't stop talking. Her face became more than just her own. It became a symbol of excessive ambition, of the fine line between reinvention and overreach. Yet unlike many others, Donatella never hid from it. She embraced her image, stood at the helm of a global fashion empire, and continued to redefine what power looks like even when the world was watching, judging, and questioning every change. Melanie Griffith. What if I told you that one of Hollywood's most iconic beauty symbols slowly became someone almost unrecognizable? Even to herself, Melanie Griffith was once the definition of natural charm. Her performance in Working Girl didn't just launch her career, it made her unforgettable. With soft features, a radiant smile, and effortless elegance, she represented a kind of beauty that felt real in an industry built on illusion. But behind the glamour, something far more unsettling was beginning to unfold. At first, it seemed harmless. A little Botox, a bit of filler, just enough to stay fresh in a world that fears aging. But slowly, those small changes began to add up. Procedures became more frequent, more aggressive. Facelifts tightened her skin beyond its natural limits. Fillers reshaped her cheekbones into sharper, unnatural angles, and Botox left her forehead nearly frozen, erasing the expressions that once made her so captivating. What started as a way to preserve her beauty ended up transforming it completely. And then came the backlash. The media turned ruthless. Fans were left confused. The conversation shifted from her talent to her appearance. But what makes this story truly powerful is what happened next. Melanie didn't hide. She admitted it. She confessed that she regretted some of her decisions. In an industry where perfection is everything, that kind of honesty is rare, and it turned her story into something much bigger than a transformation. It became a warning about how far someone can go chasing a version of themselves that may no longer exist. Carol Bryan. She wasn't a celebrity, but her story is one of the most terrifying warnings you'll ever hear. Carol Bryan wasn't chasing fame or headlines, she simply wanted to feel young again. At 47, like so many others, she turned to cosmetic fillers, hoping for a small, harmless refresh. No extreme makeover, no dramatic transformation, just a subtle change, or so she thought. But in a single moment, everything went horribly wrong. During the procedure, 2 different fillers, including silicone, were injected incorrectly into her face. What happened next was nothing short of a nightmare. Her face began to swell uncontrollably. The skin stretched, distorted, and hardened. The damage became so severe that her forehead started collapsing over her eyes, slowly taking away her ability to see. What was meant to restore confidence instead led to years of isolation, fear, and irreversible consequences. And then came the fight to survive it. After years of suffering, Carol finally underwent a grueling 17-hour surgery in an attempt to repair the damage. Doctors were able to restore part of her face, but not everything. She permanently lost vision in one eye. Today, she no longer hides her story. Instead, she shares it with the world as a stark warning. Sometimes the real danger isn't aging. It's trusting the wrong hands to fix it. Jocelyn Wildenstein. They called her Catwoman, but the real story behind that face is far more unsettling than you think. Jocelyn Wildenstein was once a glamorous socialite living a life of luxury surrounded by wealth, art, and high society. But somewhere along the way, her obsession with beauty and something far more unusual began to take control. It's been widely rumored that Jocelyn developed a fascination with feline features and wanted to reshape her appearance to resemble a cat. What followed was a series of extreme cosmetic procedures, blepharoplasty to alter her eyes fillers, to reshape her cheekbones, and multiple interventions that gradually transformed her face into something almost surreal. Her eyes appeared more lifted and slanted, her cheeks more angular and pronounced, and her overall look drifted further and further away from anything natural. The transformation wasn't sudden, it was a slow evolution until one day the world realized she no longer looked like the woman she once was. And then the media gave her a name she could never escape: Catwoman. Headlines exploded, public fascination turned into obsession. For decades, her appearance has remained one of the most talked about examples of extreme transformation. Yet despite the rumors and criticism, Jocelyn has always denied going too far. Even now, in her later years, she remains a mysterious figure, living proof that sometimes the pursuit of a unique identity can blur the line between individuality and irreversible change. Raji Narinasinghe. This might be one of the most horrifying cosmetic procedures you will ever hear about, because what was injected into her face wasn't even meant for the human body. Raji Narinasinghe was simply looking for a cheaper alternative to achieve a more youthful appearance. Like many others, she trusted someone who claimed to be a professional. But that decision would change her life forever. Instead of safe cosmetic fillers, she was injected with a toxic mixture, cement, tire sealant, and mineral oil. Yes, actual industrial materials. At first, she didn't realize what had happened, but soon her face began to harden, swell, and deform. Large lumps formed under her skin, distorting her features beyond recognition. The pain wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She withdrew from the world, hiding from public view, as her appearance became a constant reminder of a devastating mistake. Years later, her story reached a turning point when she appeared on the show Botched. Skilled surgeons managed to improve her condition, carefully removing some of the harmful substances, but not all the damage could be undone. Even today, traces remain a permanent scar from a moment of misplaced trust. Now, Raji speaks out, using her experience as a warning to others: when it comes to your face, choosing the wrong hands can cost you far more than money. Comment safe if you think beauty is never worth this kind of risk. Or comment worth it if you believe the result still matters more than the danger. I'm really curious. What would you choose? Igor and Grichka Bogdanov. They were once known for exploring the mysteries of the universe, but in the end, they became one of the biggest mysteries themselves. Igor Bogdanov and Grichka Bogdanov started as charismatic television hosts in France during the 1970s, gaining fame through science fiction and intellectual programming. With sharp minds and distinctive looks, they quickly became recognizable figures on screen. But decades later, it wasn't their work people were talking about anymore, it was their faces. Somewhere in the 1990s, everything began to change. Their appearances started shifting in ways that were impossible to ignore. Their cheekbones grew unusually high and pronounced, their chins became elongated and angular, and their lips appeared fuller with each passing year. The transformation was gradual, almost surreal, until their faces took on an almost alien-like quality that sparked endless speculation around the world. And yet, despite the obvious changes, the brothers consistently denied undergoing cosmetic surgery, deepening the mystery even further. The public reaction was intense. Media outlets across the globe debated what had happened to them, while fans struggled to reconcile the familiar figures they once knew with the dramatically altered versions in front of them. Instead of retreating, Igor and Grichka leaned into the attention, even embracing the nickname aliens with a sense of humor. But behind the curiosity and headlines lies a deeper question. When transformation goes this far, does it become a choice or something else entirely? Anastasia Pokreschuk. At what point does beauty stop being beauty and become something completely unrecognizable? Anastasia Pokreshchuk didn't just change her appearance, she redefined it in a way the world had never seen before. Once an ordinary young woman, her journey began with small cosmetic enhancements, the kind that barely raise eyebrows. But what started as curiosity quickly turned into something far more extreme. Step by step, injection by injection, Anastasia pushed the limits further than anyone expected. Her cheeks, once natural, were gradually filled and expanded to an astonishing size, creating sharp, exaggerated contours that immediately set her apart. But she didn't stop there. Fillers reshaped her lips, chin, and jaw, building a look that defied conventional standards of beauty. The transformation was bold, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. To many, it looked unnatural, even shocking. But to her, it was something else entirely. Because unlike many others on this list, Anastasia has no regrets. In fact, she openly embraces her appearance, calling it unique, powerful, and completely her own. While critics question her choices, she stands firm, claiming that these changes made her feel more confident than ever before. And that's what makes her story so fascinating, because sometimes the most extreme transformations aren't driven by pressure or fear, but by a desire to become something entirely different no matter what the world thinks. Mickey Rourke. He was once one of the most desirable men in Hollywood, the kind of face that didn't need perfection to stand out. Mickey Rourke had it all in the 1980s: raw charisma, undeniable talent, and a rugged charm that made him unforgettable on screen. But behind that rising stardom, he made a decision that would change everything. He stepped away from acting and into the brutal world of professional boxing. And that's where the damage began. Fight after fight, his face took the impact. Broken bones, shattered structure, his appearance slowly started to deteriorate. In an attempt to repair the damage, Mickey underwent multiple reconstructive surgeries, 5 rhinoplasties, additional procedures to rebuild what had been lost. But instead of restoring his original look, the surgeries left him with a face that looked swollen, altered, almost unrecognizable compared to the man audiences once knew. But what makes this story even more tragic is that it didn't stop there. In trying to maintain a youthful appearance, he also turned to Botox and fillers, adding rigidity to his expressions and further distancing himself from his natural features. Mickey later admitted that he chose the wrong surgeon, a mistake that cost him more than just his looks. And yet, despite everything, he found a way back. His performance in The Wrestler reminded the world of who he truly was, not his face, but his talent. Courtney Cox. She was once the girl everyone recognized instantly, but one day, even she couldn't recognize herself. Courtney Cox became a global icon as Monica Geller in Friends, loved for her natural beauty, expressive face, and relatable charm. For years, she seemed untouched by time, effortlessly elegant, effortlessly real. But behind the scenes, the pressure to stay youthful in Hollywood was quietly building, and eventually it caught up with her. It started the way it often does: small, controlled, almost invisible changes. A little Botox. A few fillers. Just enough to maintain what she already had. But over time, those subtle tweaks began to accumulate. Her cheekbones became more pronounced, her skin tighter, her expressions less fluid. The face audiences had connected with for years slowly shifted into something different, something less natural. And the most unsettling part? It didn't happen all at once. It happened so gradually that even she didn't realize how far it had gone, until one day she did. Courtney openly admitted that she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself anymore. That moment changed everything. In 2017, she made a bold decision to dissolve all her fillers and return to a more natural appearance. It wasn't just a physical reversal, but an emotional one. Since then, she's spoken honestly about the dangers of chasing eternal youth, reminding others that sometimes the real beauty isn't in changing your face, but in accepting it before it's too late. Priscilla Presley. She was once admired as the definition of classic beauty, but one decision changed everything. Priscilla Presley had a timeless elegance that made her stand out for decades. Known not only for her connection to Elvis Presley, but also for her own presence in Hollywood, she carried a natural grace that seemed untouchable. But even icons aren't immune to the pressure of staying forever young. In 2003, seeking to maintain her youthful appearance, Priscilla trusted someone she believed was a professional. But that trust turned into a nightmare. She was injected with industrial-grade silicone by an unlicensed doctor, substances never meant for cosmetic use. At first, the results may not have seemed alarming, but over time, the damage became impossible to hide. Lumps formed beneath her skin, her facial muscles were affected, and visible scarring began to appear. The very thing meant to enhance her beauty slowly began to destroy it. The aftermath was devastating. Years later, she underwent corrective surgeries in an attempt to repair the damage, but some effects were irreversible. Her cheekbones and lips remained swollen, her skin appeared tight and unnatural, and her facial expressions were limited. Despite everything, Priscilla continued to appear in public, carrying herself with strength. But her story stands as a powerful warning because sometimes the greatest danger isn't aging, it's trusting the wrong person to stop it. Sharon Osbourne. Sometimes one single surgery is all it takes to change everything. Sharon Osbourne has always been known for her bold personality and fearless honesty. Over the years, she openly admitted to undergoing multiple cosmetic procedures, never hiding the fact that she wanted to maintain her appearance. But in 2021, what was supposed to be just another routine facelift turned into something far more devastating. The procedure lasted over 5 hours. And when it was over, something was wrong. Sharon revealed that her face became visibly asymmetrical, one side didn't match the other. One eye sat lower than the other, giving her a distorted appearance that she herself compared to Quasimodo. The results weren't just shocking visually, they were painful. The recovery process was long, uncomfortable, and emotionally draining. What she expected to be a refresh became a mistake she couldn't ignore. But what makes this story stand out is what she chose to do next. Instead of continuing down the same path, Sharon made a decision. She was done. No more surgeries. Even after undergoing a corrective procedure to fix the damage, the experience left a lasting impact on her. And for someone who had never been afraid of cosmetic enhancements, that moment marked a turning point. Because sometimes it only takes one bad outcome to realize that chasing perfection can come at a much higher cost than anyone expects. Katie Price. She once had the kind of natural beauty that made headlines effortlessly, but over time she became known for something completely different. Katie Price, also known as Jordan, rose to fame as a glamour model admired for her striking looks and confidence. In the beginning, her image felt bold yet real, something people could recognize. But as her career evolved, so did her obsession with changing that image. What started as a few enhancements quickly turned into a long cycle of procedures. Facelifts, fillers, lip augmentations. Again and again, she returned to the operating table. One of the most shocking moments came with her 6th facelift, leaving her skin pulled so tight it created an almost permanent, unnatural expression. Her cheekbones became more pronounced, her lips fuller, her jawline sharper, each change pushing her further away from the face she once had. And unlike many others, Katie never slowed down. But here's what makes her story different. She doesn't see it as a problem. Katie has openly compared maintaining her body to fixing a car, something that requires constant upgrades and repairs. Despite criticism from fans and experts, she remains unapologetic, insisting she will continue until she reaches her version of perfection. And that raises a powerful question: when does self-improvement turn into something you can no longer stop? Carrot Top. At first glance, you might think it's just aging, but look closer and something doesn't quite add up. Carrot Top, famous for his bright red hair and over-the-top comedy style, was once known for his expressive animated face that matched his high-energy performances. But over the years, fans began to notice something unusual. His appearance was changing in ways that felt hard to explain. His face appeared fuller, tighter, almost inflated. His eyebrows looked more lifted than before, giving him a permanently surprised expression. His skin became noticeably smoother, almost too smooth, leading many to speculate about Botox fillers or even surgical procedures. The transformation wasn't dramatic overnight, but it was enough to spark endless rumors and debates across the internet. People started asking the same question: what really happened to Carrot Top? But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. He denies it all. According to him, his appearance is the result of a strict workout routine, a healthy lifestyle, and natural changes over time. No surgery, no enhancements, just discipline. And that's what makes his case so intriguing, because while the world keeps speculating, the truth remains unclear. Is it transformation or just perception? Pete Burns. He didn't just change his face, he reinvented it over and over again until even reality couldn't keep up. Pete Burns first rose to fame as the charismatic frontman of the band Dead or Alive, known for his bold style, androgynous beauty, and unforgettable presence. In the beginning, his look was unique but still natural enough to captivate audiences. But behind that image, a much more extreme transformation was quietly beginning. It all started with something simple, a rhinoplasty to fix a broken nose. But that one procedure opened the door to something much bigger. One surgery became 2, then 4, then dozens. Over time, Pete underwent more than 300 cosmetic procedures. His nose became smaller and sharper with each operation, while cheek implants created a more angular, sculpted face. Lip injections meant to enhance his appearance led to severe complications, triggering infections so serious that he required emergency surgeries just to repair the damage. What began as enhancement slowly turned into a cycle that was almost impossible to stop, and yet Pete never fully stepped away from it. His transformation became as famous as his music-sparking fascination, controversy, and concern all at once. He openly spoke about the pain, the complications, and the addiction to changing his appearance. In the end, his story isn't just about surgery, it's about how easily the search for perfection can spiral into something far beyond control. If Pete Burns' shocking transformation left you speechless, don't forget to hit that like button. Janice Dickinson. She once called herself the world's first supermodel, but her transformation would become just as famous as her career. Janice Dickinson rose to fame with striking features, fierce confidence, and a presence that dominated runways around the world. In her prime, she didn't just follow beauty standards, she defined them. But as time passed, the fear of losing that status began to take hold. It started in her 30s with what seemed like a normal decision in the modeling world: breast augmentation. But that was only the beginning. Over the years, Janice underwent multiple facelifts, liposuction procedures, and repeated Botox treatments. Her cheekbones became more pronounced, sculpted by implants, while fillers and Botox gradually reduced the natural movement of her face. The transformation was slow but undeniable. The expressive, sharp features that once made her iconic began to shift into something tighter, more artificial. But the consequences didn't stop at appearance. Behind the scenes, the cost of maintaining that image began to pile up financially and emotionally. In 2013, Janice filed for bankruptcy, reportedly due in part to debts linked to cosmetic procedures. And yet, unlike many others, she never hid from it. She spoke openly, even proudly, about her choices. Because for her, this wasn't just about chasing youth, it was about holding on to an identity she had built her entire life around. Simon Cowell. He built his reputation judging others, but eventually the spotlight turned back on him. Simon Cowell became a global icon through shows like American Idol, known for his sharp opinions, confidence, and polished appearance. For years, he maintained a clean, youthful look that matched his powerful presence on screen. But behind that image, a quiet transformation was taking place. It started with Botox, something he openly admitted to using in order to stay fresh under the harsh lights of television. At first, the results were subtle, almost unnoticeable. But over time, the procedures became more frequent and more extreme. Facelifts and fillers began to reshape his face, tightening his skin and lifting his cheekbones higher than before. His expressions changed. His face appeared smoother but also more rigid, almost frozen. The natural balance he once had slowly gave way to something that looked different. And then came the moment that made it impossible to ignore. Even his own son reportedly reacted to his new appearance. That was the wake-up call. Simon later admitted that he may have gone too far, acknowledging the risks of chasing a younger look. Since then, he has taken a step back, choosing a more natural approach. Because sometimes even the harshest critic has to face the truth that perfection isn't something you can force, especially not on your own face. Joan Rivers. Some people hide their cosmetic surgeries, but she turned hers into a punchline. Joan Rivers wasn't just a legendary comedian, she was fearless, unapologetic, and brutally honest about everything, including her own face. At a time when most celebrities denied going under the knife, Joan did the exact opposite. She talked about it openly, joked about it, and even built part of her identity around it. Over the years, she underwent an impressive number of procedures: facelifts, rhinoplasties, Botox injections, liposuction, constantly refining and reshaping her appearance. With each surgery, her face became tighter, smoother, and less expressive. The natural softness she once had gradually gave way to a more rigid, almost artificial look. And yet, unlike others who faced criticism in silence, Joan leaned into it. She famously described herself as the poster child for plastic surgery, turning what could have been controversy into comedy. But behind the humor, there was a deeper truth. Joan understood the pressure of staying relevant in an industry obsessed with youth. Instead of pretending to resist it, she embraced it completely. Her transformation became part of her legacy, not something she ran from. And in a strange way, that honesty made her stand out even more. Because while others tried to hide their changes, Joan Rivers made sure the world saw them and laughed with her anyway. Heidi Montag. Imagine changing your entire face in a single day. That's exactly what Heidi Montag did, and the world couldn't believe it. Rising to fame through the reality show, The Hills. Heidi was known for her girl-next-door look and relatable charm. She didn't need to stand out, she already did. But behind the scenes, she was chasing something more, something she believed would make her perfect. In 2010, she made a decision that shocked everyone. Heidi underwent 10 cosmetic procedures in just one day. Breast augmentation, chin reduction, brow lift, cheek implants, lip fillers, a second rhinoplasty. Her entire face and body were transformed in a matter of hours. The result was dramatic, almost unrecognizable. What was once soft and natural became sculpted sharper and for many overly artificial. The transformation sparked global headlines, turning her into one of the most talked about cases of extreme plastic surgery. But what happened after was even more revealing. Heidi later opened up about the physical pain and emotional struggles she faced following those procedures. Recovery was far more difficult than she expected, and the reality didn't match the dream she had been chasing. Although she defended her choices at the time, her story became a powerful example of how quickly the pursuit of perfection can spiral out of control, especially when everything changes all at once. Changes all at once. Changes all at once. What if everything you believed about natural Hollywood icons was never real? From subtle corrections to shocking transformations, these male celebrities didn't just age, they were quietly recrafted. Behind the fame lies a hidden world of procedures, secrets, and before and after changes no one talks about. This is the most unbelievable plastic surgery journey of male Hollywood stars, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Cary Grant. There are men who become famous, and then there are men who become standards. Cary Grant was not merely admired, he was studied, imitated, almost mythologized as the definition of sophistication itself. Every gesture felt rehearsed by destiny. Every smile carried a precision that seemed too perfect to question. He didn't chase youth, youth appeared to follow him obediently year after year, film after film. Yet somewhere beneath that immaculate surface, a quieter narrative unfolded, one that rarely made it past the studio gates. It was said that the transformation from Archibald Leach into Cary Grant was not simply a reinvention of identity, but a careful refinement of appearance. Early records hinted at extensive dental work in the 1930s, reshaping his smile into something the camera could worship. Not exaggerated, not artificial, just precise enough to blur the line between nature and design. As decades passed and the industry tightened its grip on youth, Grant continued to defy expectations. Into his 50s, he remained the leading man, romantic, desirable, untouched by time. But attentive eyes began to notice subtle shifts. Around the late 1950s, a faint tightening around his gaze, a lifted clarity that softened the weight of aging. It was whispered that an upper eyelid procedure had taken place quietly, discreetly, in perfect alignment with Hollywood's unspoken rule: improve but never reveal. Even collaborators like Alfred Hitchcock acknowledged a refreshed appearance, though the truth itself remained carefully unspoken. What made Grant's transformation so remarkable was its invisibility. Nothing about him seemed altered, only enhanced, as if time itself had been negotiated rather than resisted. Those close to him compared it to maintaining something exquisite, something valuable, routine, care for a priceless object. And the world accepted that illusion, willingly crediting his agelessness to disciplined genetics, anything but intervention. No confession ever broke the spell. No headline ever exposed the process. The image remained intact, polished to perfection, untouched by scandal. And yet, as the legend continues to linger in cinematic history, a quiet uncertainty remains. If the most effortlessly elegant man in Hollywood required such careful preservation, then perhaps the real illusion was never his face, but the idea that it was ever untouched at all. Clark Gable. He was called the King, a man whose presence didn't just fill the screen, it consumed it. In the golden haze of early Hollywood, Clark Gable stood as the ultimate symbol of rugged American masculinity, the kind that felt untouched, unpolished, almost accidental. His charm seemed effortless, his face perfectly balanced between danger and desire, as if nature itself had sculpted him for the camera. Audiences didn't question it. They believed in him the way people believe in myths, completely blindly, without hesitation. But behind the studio gates, where the lights dimmed and the truth moved in whispers, a different version of the story quietly took shape. It was said that when Gable first arrived in Hollywood in the late 1920s, executives didn't see a king. They saw potential buried beneath imperfections. Ears that protruded just enough to break the illusion, teeth damaged by years of hardship and illness. In an industry obsessed with perfection, these were not minor details. They were problems to be corrected, erased, rewritten without a trace. And then, without announcement, without scandal, it began. In 1932, Gable underwent a procedure that few would ever dare speak of: his ears surgically pinned back, performed without general anesthesia. A quiet act of transformation hidden behind studio walls. But the deeper change came next, more drastic, more unsettling. Due to severe dental issues, most of his teeth were removed entirely, replaced with dentures crafted to create that now iconic smile. What the world would later call effortless charm was in truth something carefully constructed, painfully, deliberately, and in total secrecy. From that moment on, a new image was born. The man audiences saw on screen, confident, flawless, magnetic, was no longer just Clark Gable, but a perfected version of him shaped by the invisible hands of Hollywood itself. His transformation set a precedent, a silent blueprint for generations of male stars who would follow. Subtlety became the rule, enhancement without detection, perfection without confession, and the illusion held stronger than ever. No headlines ever revealed it. No interviews confirmed it. The contracts demanded silence, and silence is what the world received. For decades, audiences believed they were witnessing something natural, something real. But now, as fragments of that hidden history surface, the myth begins to tremble. Because if even the King of Hollywood was carefully rebuilt behind closed doors, then one question refuses to fade: was the legend ever real, or was it simply the greatest performance of all three? Dean Martin. He didn't try to be charming, he simply was. Dean Martin carried himself with a kind of effortless cool that made the world believe nothing could ever disturb him. The voice, the smile, the slow, confident gaze, it all felt natural, almost careless, as if he had never once looked in a mirror and questioned what he saw. In an industry obsessed with perfection, Martin appeared to stand above it, untouched by vanity, immune to the pressures that shaped everyone else. But behind that laid-back persona, another version of the story quietly circulated among those who watched more closely. It was said that in the early 1950s, just as his career alongside Jerry Lewis began to rise, a subtle but undeniable change appeared. His nose, once more prominent, slightly rough, had been refined. Not dramatically, not enough to draw attention, but just enough to align his face with the kind of symmetry Hollywood favored. The transformation was so controlled that most never questioned it. They simply accepted the illusion. As the years moved forward and Martin stepped deeper into fame, the stakes grew higher. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, time began to leave its mark even on someone who seemed so effortlessly timeless. And yet once again, something shifted. His jawline appeared tighter, his neck more defined. The heaviness around his eyes softened under the unforgiving glare of studio lights. Whispers suggested a lower facelift along with subtle work around the eyes, procedures carefully chosen not to erase his identity, but to preserve the image the world had come to expect. What made it all so unsettling was how perfectly it aligned with his persona. The man who seemed not to care was quietly maintaining everything. Fellow insiders, including Sammy Davis Jr., reportedly joked about these changes, hinting at a truth that everyone in the inner circle understood, but no one openly declared. It wasn't deception, it was simply part of the system. A silent agreement between image and reality. And still the illusion held. To the public, Dean Martin remained the same smooth, unbothered, eternally cool. But as the years passed and the techniques of the time began to show their limits, faint traces of those hidden interventions surfaced, especially around the eyes. Just enough to remind those paying attention that even the most effortless image often requires the most careful construction. And somewhere beneath that legendary nonchalance, one question lingers quietly. If the man who seemed to care the least was still adjusting the mask, then who in Hollywood was ever truly unfiltered? I'm curious, what time did you watch this video? Leave a comment below and let's chat. Kirk Douglas. There was nothing delicate about him. No polished softness, no effortless perfection, just a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone and tested by fire. Kirk Douglas didn't represent beauty in the traditional Hollywood sense. He embodied strength, defiance, and a kind of raw masculinity that felt almost untouchable. That cleft chin, that piercing stare, they weren't flaws to be hidden, they were signatures that made him unforgettable. But even a face built on intensity is not immune to time. As the decades moved forward, the industry's silent pressure began to close in, even on someone as formidable as Douglas. It was said that around 1975, approaching 60, he made a choice that quietly aligned him with the very system he seemed to stand apart from. A facelift subtle strategic not to transform who he was, but to preserve the commanding presence that had defined his career. It wasn't about vanity, it was about survival in a world that rarely forgives aging. What set Douglas apart was not the decision itself, but what followed. While others hid behind silence, he spoke with unexpected candor. In an industry built on illusion, his admission, "Everyone does it," cut through the facade like a sudden flash of light. It didn't just reveal his own choices, it exposed an entire culture that had operated quietly in the background for decades. His honesty didn't destroy the illusion, it made it more complex, more human. And yet time continued its slow negotiation. Over the years, further procedures were said to follow: facelifts, brow lifts, work around the eyes. Each one adding a new layer to a face audiences had known for generations. The result was not a reinvention, but a gradual tightening, a windswept version of the man he once was. The strength remained, but it carried a different texture, shaped not only by age, but by the effort to hold it back. In the end, Kirk Douglas stood as something rare in Hollywood, not just a legend on screen, but a figure who allowed glimpses of the machinery behind the image. His face became more than a symbol of masculinity. It became a record of choices of time resisted, and of an industry where even the strongest icons are quietly reshaped behind the scenes. Burt Lancaster. He moved like a man who belonged to gravity and yet somehow defied it. Before Hollywood ever claimed him, Burt Lancaster was already something of a spectacle, an acrobat, a performer whose body was not just his instrument but his identity. On screen, that physicality translated into something magnetic, strength, agility, and a presence that felt almost too alive to be manufactured. He wasn't just seen, he was felt. But even bodies built for performance are not immune to scrutiny. As Lancaster stepped deeper into the machinery of Hollywood, it was said that subtle corrections began to shape the image the world would come to admire. In 1947, early in his rise, he reportedly underwent ear pinning and adjustment so precise it didn't erase his character, only refined it. Then came the smile. In the early 1950s, dental work transformed his teeth into the bright, commanding grin that would become one of his trademarks. It wasn't about changing who he was, it was about sharpening the illusion. What made Lancaster different was how he viewed it all. To him, the body was something to maintain, to refine, much like the disciplined routines that had defined his acrobatic past. And as the years progressed, that philosophy extended to his face. By 1967, whispers pointed to an early brow lift, lifting the weight of time just enough to preserve the intensity of his gaze. Later in the mid-1970s, more advanced techniques like thread lifts were said to be part of his quiet evolution, allowing him to adapt without stepping too far into the artificial. Unlike others who resisted or resented the industry's demands, Lancaster seemed to accept them with a certain clarity. "This business is about illusion," he once admitted, a line that lingered like a confession hidden in plain sight. He didn't pretend the image was untouched. He understood that what audiences saw was a carefully maintained version of reality, one that required discipline, adjustment, and constant awareness. And so his transformation never felt abrupt, only inevitable. Each change blended into the next, preserving not youth but presence. The result was a man who aged on screen without ever losing control of how that aging was perceived, a balance so precise it almost disappeared. In Lancaster, Hollywood didn't just create an image, it revealed how even the strongest identities are quietly shaped by the invisible hands behind the curtain. Robert Mitchum. He didn't look like a movie star, and that was exactly why he became one. Robert Mitchum carried a heaviness in his gaze, a slow burning presence that felt almost indifferent to the camera. While others chased perfection, Mitchum seemed to reject it entirely. His rough edges, his tired eyes, his unpolished features becoming the very things that made him unforgettable. He wasn't designed to be admired, he was meant to be believed. But even a man who built his legend on imperfection could not completely escape the quiet machinery of Hollywood. When he first arrived in the 1940s, it was said that his features, especially his nose, were seen as obstacles to leading man status. There were conversations, suggestions, subtle pressures. And eventually, in 1947, he agreed to a rhinoplasty. Not to erase his identity, but to refine it just enough to satisfy the camera without betraying the rawness that defined him. What followed, however, set him apart from nearly everyone else in the industry. As time passed and aging began to mark his face, Mitchum resisted the deeper transformations others embraced. His heavy-lidded eyes, once considered a flaw, became his signature, and when the idea of an eyelid lift surfaced in the 1950s, he refused. It was a rare act of defiance in a system built on correction. Instead of chasing youth, he chose to preserve character. Still, the story did not end in complete resistance. Between the late 1960s and mid-1970s, subtle maintenance procedures were said to take place, quiet adjustments aimed at preserving his strong jawline and overall presence. Not dramatic, not transformative, just enough to hold the image together without breaking the illusion of effortlessness. His physician reportedly described it not as reinvention, but as maintenance, a careful balance between aging and identity. In the end, Mitchum's face became something unusual in Hollywood, a blend of authenticity and quiet intervention. The imperfections remained, the attitude endured, and the myth of the unpolished star stayed intact. Yet beneath that surface, the truth lingered softly. Even the man who seemed to reject the system had, in his own way, learned how to navigate it without ever letting it fully take control. Kenny Rogers. His voice told stories, but over time his face began to tell a different one. Kenny Rogers was never just a country music legend, he was a presence warm and familiar, the kind of man audiences trusted the moment they saw him. His image wasn't built on perfection, but on relatability, a face that carried emotion, history, and a quiet sincerity that felt untouched by Hollywood's harsher expectations. But as the years passed and the spotlight refused to dim, even that authenticity came under pressure. In the early 1990s, as he entered his 50s, subtle changes began to appear. It was said that his first procedures focused on his eyes, addressing the heaviness that time had placed upon them. A lift carefully done meant not to transform him, but to restore the clarity that had always been part of his presence. And unlike many others, Rogers did not hide. He admitted it openly, almost casually, as if acknowledging something inevitable. For a while, it seemed to work. The results were described as natural, even refreshing, a man simply taking control of how he aged. But time, as it often does, complicated the story. By the late 2000s, further procedures were said to follow. Another lift, more tightening, more refinement. And this time, something shifted. The face that had once felt so familiar began to look different. Not unrecognizable, but altered in a way that couldn't be ignored. What made this transformation stand apart was not just the change itself, but the honesty that followed. Rogers later spoke about it with surprising candor, admitting that the results didn't feel entirely right, that something had been pushed too far. "It made me look like I'm startled all the time," he confessed, a line that carried both humor and quiet regret. It was a rare moment in an industry that often chooses silence over reflection. And so, his story became something more than just transformation. It became a cautionary echo within the world of image and identity. A reminder that even when the intention is control, the outcome can slip into something unexpected. Yet through it all, the voice remained unchanged, the legacy intact, and the man behind the image still visible, just layered with choices that could never be fully undone. If this made you see him differently, even just a little, leave a like to support the video and let me know you're still watching. 8. Tom Cruise. Some stars fade, others evolve, and then there are those who seem to outrun time itself. Tom Cruise belongs to that last category, a figure whose energy, intensity, and almost supernatural youth have defined Hollywood across 4 decades. From the reckless charm of his early roles to the controlled precision of global action icon status, he has remained remarkably unchanged. Or at least that is how it appears. But beneath that consistency, there have always been whispers, quiet observations that something somewhere had been refined. In his earliest years, Cruise's smile was far from perfect. Slightly misaligned, uneven, carrying the imperfections of a young actor still finding his place. And yet, by the time he reached the heights of films like Top Gun, that smile had transformed, brighter, straighter, unmistakably cinematic. It was said that dental work, possibly veneers, played a role in shaping what would become one of the most recognizable smiles in Hollywood. The changes did not stop there, they simply became more difficult to define. As his career moved forward, subtle refinements appeared, his nose slightly more balanced, his features more symmetrical yet never dramatically altered, the kind of adjustments that don't demand attention but quietly enhance what is already there. By the time he entered his 40s, something even more unusual began to emerge, a face that seemed to resist aging altogether. By the 2000s, the conversation grew louder. His appearance, fuller, smoother, almost untouched by time, sparked ongoing speculation. Experts and observers suggested the possibility of non-invasive treatments, procedures designed not to change but to preserve. The effect was striking, a version of Tom Cruise that still resembled the man from decades earlier, yet carried a polished, almost ageless quality that felt increasingly rare. And yet through it all, the narrative never shifted. Cruise consistently attributed his appearance to disciplined lifestyle and good genetics. No confirmations, no admissions, only the continuation of an image carefully maintained over time. The result is a presence that feels both familiar and elusive. A face that audiences recognize instantly, even as it seems to exist just slightly outside the natural rhythm of aging. John Travolta's reinvention was never a choice for him, it was a pattern. John Travolta didn't just survive Hollywood, he reshaped himself to stay within it. From the electrifying energy of a disco-era icon to the unexpected resurgence of a cinematic comeback, his career moved in waves. And with each new chapter, his appearance seemed to shift along with it, as if the man and the image were evolving side by side. In the beginning, the changes were quiet, almost practical. After the explosive success of Saturday Night Fever, it was said that attention turned to something less glamorous but equally important: his hairline. Already receding at a young age, it posed a threat to the youthful image that had just captivated the world. Around 1980, early hair transplant procedures reportedly entered the picture. Primitive, painful, but effective enough to sustain the illusion. At the time, few noticed. Those who didn't speak. But Hollywood has a way of magnifying everything over time. By the early 2000s, as Travolta stepped into a new phase of his career, the transformation became more layered. His hair appeared fuller, sometimes almost too precise, while his facial structure seemed tighter, more defined. Whispers began to circulate not just about surgical procedures, but about a combination of techniques. Hair systems, cosmetic adjustments, subtle lifts, a carefully assembled image designed to adapt to each public appearance. What made his case so fascinating was the inconsistency. In some moments, he appeared polished, almost reconstructed. In others, more natural, even vulnerable. The contrast between red carpet perfection and candid glimpses of his real appearance created a kind of duality, two versions of the same man coexisting in plain sight. It wasn't just transformation, it was control, the ability to choose which version the world would see at any given time. In recent years, that control has softened. Travolta has at times stepped into the public eye without the layers, embracing a more natural look, revealing the passage of time rather than resisting it. And yet, the history of reinvention remains written across his image, a reminder that in Hollywood, identity is rarely fixed. It shifts, adapts, and evolves, sometimes so seamlessly that the audience forgets there was ever anything to question at all. Mickey Rourke. There was a time when his face looked like trouble, the kind people couldn't resist watching. Mickey Rourke emerged in the 1980s as something dangerously captivating. Handsome, unpredictable, carrying a raw intensity that made him feel less like a polished star and more like a man pulled straight from the edge of reality. He didn't need perfection. His appeal came from the cracks, the tension, the sense that something beneath the surface might break at any moment. But then the story shifted violently, unexpectedly. In the early 1990s, Rourke stepped away from Hollywood and into the boxing ring, a decision that would leave marks far deeper than any role ever could. It was said that during those years, his face endured repeated trauma, broken nose, fractured cheekbones, injuries that demanded reconstruction rather than refinement. What followed were surgeries not for beauty, but for repair. Yet somewhere along that line, the boundary between necessity and alteration began to blur. By the late 1990s, the changes became more complex. Rourke reportedly sought additional procedures attempting to restore what had been lost. But this time, something went wrong. He would later admit with a kind of quiet resignation that he had chosen the wrong surgeon. And from that point forward, his face, once defined by natural intensity, began to take on a different, more altered form. Not unrecognizable, but undeniably changed. As the 2000s arrived, his appearance became inseparable from his narrative. Films like The Wrestler didn't just showcase his acting, they reflected his reality. The face audiences saw was no longer just a Hollywood image. It was a record of impact, of decisions, of attempts to rebuild something that could never fully return to what it once was. Each line, each shift carried a history that couldn't be hidden beneath lighting or angles. And yet, unlike many others, Rourke never fully hid from it. He spoke about his surgeries, his mistakes, his regrets with a blunt honesty that felt almost out of place in Hollywood. His face altered and uneven became something else entirely, not a symbol of perfection, but of consequence. A visible reminder that in a world obsessed with control, some transformations don't enhance the story, they become the story itself. Brad Pitt. There was a moment in Hollywood when his face didn't just represent beauty, it redefined it. Brad Pitt emerged in the 1990s like a carefully lit illusion, too symmetrical, too effortlessly magnetic, the kind of presence that seemed almost engineered for the camera. He wasn't just admired, he became a reference point, a standard against which other leading men were quietly measured. And at that time, no one questioned it because perfection, when it appears that natural, rarely invites suspicion. But what makes his story linger is not the rise, it's the aftermath. As the years unfolded and time began its inevitable work, something unusual happened. While other icons of his generation visibly shifted, softened, or faded, Pitt seemed to move differently through time, slower, more controlled, almost deliberate. The sharpness of his jaw remained. The clarity in his eyes endured. Even as age traced itself lightly across his face, it never seemed to fully claim him. It was in that subtle resistance that the whispers began. Not loud, not accusatory, just quiet observations from those who paid closer attention. It was said that his evolution was not accidental but carefully managed. Small, almost invisible interventions over the years, skin treatments, refined adjustments, possibly minor lifts, each one timed with precision. Not enough to transform, never enough to disrupt recognition, only enough to preserve what had always been there. And that is what made the illusion so effective. There was no single moment of change, no clear before and after to expose the process. Instead, it was a gradual continuity, a face that aged but never seemed to weaken. He didn't look frozen, he looked edited, a version of time where the harsher details had been softened, the sharper edges retained the balance carefully maintained between maturity and memory. What the world saw was aging gracefully. What remained unspoken was how much effort it might take to achieve something that appears so effortless. Pitt never confirmed, never denied, allowing the narrative to remain exactly where it was most powerful in ambiguity. And so his image continues to exist in that quiet space between reality and refinement, a face that has aged, yes, but always on its own terms, never entirely surrendering to the passage of time. If this video made you look at these legends differently, hit like to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and turn on notifications. Because some stories aren't meant to be told and we're just getting started. In Hollywood, beauty is currency and aging is treated like a crime. What begins as a simple attempt to stay young can spiral into obsession, transforming once iconic faces into something shocking. Today we're uncovering the stories of 20 celebrities who paid the ultimate price for chasing perfection, losing not just their looks but their identities. Lara Flynn Boyle. Lara Flynn Boyle was once the kind of beauty Hollywood couldn't manufacture: sharp, mysterious, slightly dangerous. In Twin Peaks and The Practice, her face didn't just look good on camera, it told stories. But as the years passed and the pressure to stay young crept in, that face began to change quietly at first, then unmistakably. The early tweaks: barely raised eyebrows, smoother skin, subtly fuller lips. But over time the changes stacked up. Botox fillers, lip injections, possibly more. Her lips grew tight and swollen, stretched past natural movement. Her cheeks became rounder and heavier, slowly erasing the sharp angles that once defined her. The skin on her forehead and mid-face looked unnaturally smooth, almost frozen, as if emotion itself had been pressed flat beneath the surface. And people noticed. Fans did double takes. Photographers zoomed in. Online comments turned from concern to shock. "Is that really her?" became a recurring headline. Public appearances sparked whispers, then blunt judgment. Some felt sad, others cruel. Side-by-side photos spread like evidence, dissecting every millimeter of change. Through it all, Lara stayed mostly silent. No explanations, no confessions. And that silence only made the story louder. In an industry that treats aging like failure, her transformation became a cautionary tale of how the fight to stay young can slowly erase the very face that made the world fall in love in the first place. Amanda Lepore. Amanda Lepore never wanted to look normal. From the very beginning, her transformation was intentional, extreme, and unapologetic. While most people chase subtle beauty, Amanda chased fantasy, and she was willing to carve her body into it piece by piece. Her journey began shockingly early. A nose job at just 15, gender reassignment surgery at 17, and that was only the opening chapter. Over the years, Amanda underwent countless procedures, multiple rhinoplasties, lip fillers, cheek implants, brow lifts, eyelid surgery, Botox fillers, each one pushing her further away from human proportions and closer to a living doll aesthetic inspired by vintage pinup icons. Her lips became impossibly full, almost sculpted. Her cheeks rose into perfect heart shapes. Her eyes widened into a permanent, exaggerated gaze. But the most extreme step shocked even seasoned surgeons. Amanda had her lower ribs removed to achieve an unnaturally tiny waist. Painful, controversial, irreversible. Public reaction was brutal and fascinated at the same time. Some called her a masterpiece. Others called her a warning. Fashion insiders stared. Tabloids gawked. Online comments swung between admiration and disbelief. But Amanda never flinched. Unlike many on this list, she never blamed pressure or regret. She owned every incision. "I have the most expensive body in the world," she famously said, and she meant it. In a world obsessed with looking natural, Amanda Lepore chose to become artificial on purpose, proving that for some transformation isn't a mistake. It's the identity itself. Lil' Kim. Lil' Kim's transformation is one of the most haunting and misunderstood stories in hip-hop. In the late 1990s, she was unmistakable bold features, fierce confidence, a face that reflected both vulnerability and power. But behind the fame, there was trauma. According to Lil' Kim herself, the turning point came after years of domestic abuse that left her with a broken nose, forcing her to undergo reconstructive surgery. What began as medical necessity quietly opened the door to something far more complicated. After the first nose job, the changes didn't stop. Each appearance revealed a slimmer nose, then an even smaller one until it barely resembled her original face. Fillers reshaped her cheeks, making them fuller and sharper. Botox smoothed her skin to the point where emotion seemed muted, her expressions restrained. Her lips grew increasingly plump, exaggerated, almost disconnected from the face fans remembered. And then came the reaction. Audiences were stunned. Social media erupted. Side-by-side photos spread everywhere, accompanied by disbelief, mockery, and speculation. Some fans expressed heartbreak, others crossed into cruelty. The question followed her relentlessly. Why would she do this to herself? Few stopped to ask what pain might have driven her there. Adding fuel to the fire, her skin tone appeared noticeably lighter over time, sparking intense controversy and accusations of skin-bleaching claims she firmly denied. Still, the damage was done. To many, Lil' Kim became almost unrecognizable, a stranger wearing the shadow of a legend. Her story isn't just about surgery, it's about trauma control and an industry that watches women break, then criticizes how they survive. Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers never hid her love affair with plastic surgery. In fact, she turned it into a punchline. But behind the jokes was a lifelong obsession with defying age in an industry that discards older women without mercy. Her first cosmetic procedure, an eyelid lift at just 32, marked the beginning of a transformation that would continue for the rest of her life. Over the decades, Joan underwent an astonishing number of procedures: multiple facelifts, brow lifts, rhinoplasties, Botox injections, fillers, and liposuction. Each surgery promised youth control and relevance. And for a while, it worked. Her skin grew tighter, smoother, almost polished. Wrinkles vanished. Gravity was held at bay. But something else disappeared too: movement. As the years went on, her face became increasingly stiff. The forehead barely moved. Smiles looked fixed. Her once soft, rounded features sharpened into an almost doll-like mask. Viewers noticed. Audiences whispered. Late-night jokes turned into uneasy stares. Some admired her honesty. Others wondered if she'd gone too far. Joan didn't flinch. She embraced it all, famously calling herself the poster girl for plastic surgery. But beneath the humor was a harsher truth: staying young became part of her survival strategy. Joan Rivers didn't just fight aging, she declared war on it, and the scars of that battle were written permanently across her face. Simon Cowell. Simon Cowell built a career on brutal honesty, but when it came to his own face, the truth arrived too late. For years, the music mogul openly relied on Botox to slow aging under the unforgiving glare of television cameras. At first, the results were subtle: smoother skin, fewer lines, nothing alarming. But like so many in Hollywood, stopping became harder than starting. Eventually, Botox wasn't enough. Simon turned to more invasive procedures, including facelifts meant to rewind time. Instead, they tightened his skin too far. His mid-face appeared lifted unnaturally high, stretching his features into a permanent look of surprise. His jawline softened, losing the sharp authority that once matched his no-nonsense persona. Even his eyes changed. Eyelid surgeries left them wide and tense, as if his face could no longer relax. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Viewers flooded social media with comments comparing him to a wax figure or a character from a horror movie. The moment that cut deepest came at home. Simon admitted that even his young son reacted with concern, unsettled by the sudden change. For the first time, Simon didn't deflect or joke. He confessed regret, acknowledging that he had gone too far trying to stay young on screen. In an industry obsessed with youth, Simon Cowell learned the hard way that turning back the clock can sometimes leave you staring at a stranger in the mirror. Janice Dickinson. Janice Dickinson once ruled the fashion world, celebrated as the original supermodel with a face that defined raw confidence and effortless sex appeal. But as the industry's obsession with youth tightened its grip, Janice made a decision that would reshape not only her face but her life. She started early. Breast augmentation in her 30s, followed by a steady stream of cosmetic procedures, facelifts, Botox fillers, liposuction, and cheek implants. Each surgery promised control over time. Each one pulled her features tighter. Her skin became smooth, almost stretched. Her cheekbones rose sharply, sculpted to perfection yet increasingly unnatural. With Botox freezing her expressions and fillers swelling her lips, the face that once felt alive began to look fixed, posed even at rest. The public noticed. Fashion insiders whispered. Viewers stared. Some praised her fearlessness. Others recoiled from the excess. Janice didn't retreat. She doubled down, unapologetic, even appearing on Botched to fix a disastrous breast surgery from decades earlier. But the pursuit of perfection came at a price. Endless procedures drained her finances, eventually contributing to her bankruptcy in 2013. Janice Dickinson's transformation is a stark reminder that in a world where beauty equals survival, even icons can lose everything chasing a face that never grows old. ¿Crees que Simon Cowell tomó la decisión correcta al dejar la cirugía estética debido a su hijo? Comenta uno si estás de acuerdo y cero si no. Pete Burns. Pete Burns was never meant to blend in. As the flamboyant frontman of Dead or Alive, his look was as unforgettable as his music, bold, androgynous, and defiantly different. But what began as self-expression slowly turned into one of the most extreme and tragic transformations in pop culture history. It started with a single nose job to repair a broken nose. Then another, and another. After 4 rhinoplasties, his nose became smaller, sharper, and barely resembled its original shape. That opened the door. Cheekbone implants followed, carving his face into harsh, angular planes. His cheeks grew so prominent they dominated his entire face, overwhelming what was left of his natural structure. Then came the lips. Multiple injections left them massively swollen, painfully stretched beyond their limits. At one point, the complications were so severe, Pete couldn't even open his mouth. Emergency surgery was required just to save the tissue. But even that didn't stop the cycle. By the end of his life, Pete Burns had undergone more than 300 cosmetic procedures. His face became a living symbol of obsession, constantly changing, constantly repaired, never at peace. Public reaction swung between fascination and horror, while Pete himself spoke openly about the pain and consequences. Pete Burns didn't just chase transformation, he surrendered himself to it. And in doing so, he became one of the most haunting warnings of what happens when identity and surgery become impossible to separate. Carrot Top for years. Carrot Top's face has been almost as talked about as his comedy. Known for his wild red hair and over-the-top stage persona, the comedian built a career on exaggeration, but offstage the changes to his appearance sparked a very different kind of attention. As the years passed, fans began to notice something was off. His eyebrows appeared higher and more sharply arched than before, giving his face a permanently intense look. His once lean, angular features grew noticeably fuller, especially around the cheeks, leading to speculation about fillers or implants. His skin, once textured and expressive, became unusually smooth, fueling rumors of Botox or chemical treatments. Public reaction was immediate and relentless. Online forums dissected old photos, lining them up against new ones like forensic evidence. Late-night jokes turned into uncomfortable commentary. Some fans were confused, others were openly skeptical. The question followed him everywhere. What happened to Carrot Top's face? Yet Carrot Top has consistently denied undergoing plastic surgery. Instead, he credits his dramatic transformation to intense workouts, a strict lifestyle, and aging in the public eye. He even joked that if he had surgery, he'd look even better. Whether surgical or not, the mystery refuses to fade. His evolving appearance remains one of Hollywood's most debated transformations, proof that sometimes denial only makes the spotlight burn brighter. Katie Price. Katie Price was once the definition of natural girl-next-door beauty. In her early modeling days, her soft features and expressive face made her instantly recognizable. But over the years, that familiar face began to disappear slowly at first, then shockingly fast. Her cosmetic journey escalated into obsession. Katie has undergone at least 6 facelifts, each one pulling her skin tighter than the last. One extreme brow lift raised her eyebrows so high that fans compared her expression to Spock, an outcome she openly admitted went too far. Fillers transformed her cheeks into prominent, rounded shapes, giving her face a heavy, artificial look far removed from her earlier softness. Her lips didn't escape either. Repeated injections left them overly plump, stretched beyond natural proportion. Multiple rhinoplasties refined her nose again and again, sharpening it to the point where it no longer matched the rest of her face. Every new procedure seemed to demand another fix, creating a cycle that never truly ended. Public reaction was harsh and non-stop. Social media mocked. Tabloids circled. Before and after photos went viral, turning her face into a spectacle. Yet Katie remained unapologetic. She famously compared cosmetic surgery to maintaining a car, something that simply needs regular work. Katie Price's transformation is a loud, unfiltered example of what happens when the pursuit of perfection never hits the brakes and the mirror stops reflecting the past. Priscilla Presley. Priscilla Presley was once the image of classic Hollywood elegant soft features, porcelain skin, and a timeless beauty forever linked to the legacy of Elvis. For decades, she seemed untouched by time. But behind that polished image lay one of the most disturbing cosmetic surgery disasters in celebrity history. In 2003, Priscilla made a decision that would change her face forever. Trusting an unlicensed doctor named Daniel Serrano, she allowed him to inject industrial-grade silicone into her face. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Hard lumps formed beneath her skin. Muscles began to stiffen. Parts of her face lost movement entirely, creating a mask-like, uneven appearance, especially around her lips and cheeks. Public reaction was brutal. Fans were shocked. Tabloids exploded with speculation. Side-by-side photos flooded the media, documenting a face that no longer resembled the woman people remembered. Though she underwent corrective surgery in 2008, much of the damage proved irreversible. Her cheekbones appeared overfilled and swollen, her lips unnaturally plump, and her facial expressions limited by additional facelifts and Botox meant to hide the original mistake. In 2019, surgery to remove cancerous tissue from her nose reportedly deepened her anxiety over scarring, pulling her further into cosmetic interventions. What began as a single tragic error turned into a lifelong struggle to maintain control over her appearance. Priscilla Presley's story stands as a chilling warning. One wrong decision in the pursuit of youth can leave scars no surgery can truly erase. Sharon Osbourne. Sharon Osbourne has never been shy about plastic surgery. For years, she spoke openly, almost casually, about facelifts, neck lifts, Botox, and breast procedures. But in 2021, one routine decision shattered that confidence and turned her honesty into regret. The facelift was supposed to refresh her appearance. Instead, it distorted it. After a grueling 5.5-hour surgery, Sharon looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. One eye sat noticeably lower than the other. Her face appeared pulled and uneven. "I looked like Quasimodo," she admitted, describing a face that felt twisted and unfamiliar. The reaction was immediate and personal. Even her husband Ozzy Osbourne was visibly disturbed by the results. Friends noticed. Cameras noticed. And Sharon felt the stares before anyone said a word. Recovery was painful both physically and emotionally, and the damage couldn't be ignored. She was forced to undergo additional corrective surgery, turning one procedure into a chain of complications. Public sympathy mixed with shock as Sharon spoke out, her voice stripped of bravado. After decades of altering her appearance, this was the breaking point. She declared she was finished with cosmetic surgery for good. Sharon Osbourne's experience proves that even for someone who thinks they know the risks, one bad outcome can change everything instantly, permanently, and painfully. Courtney Cox. Courtney Cox was once the picture of effortless beauty. As Monica Geller on Friends, her face was expressive, fresh, and instantly familiar to millions. But when the cameras kept rolling and time refused to slow down, the pressure to stay young quietly took hold. It started small, Botox here, fillers there. Subtle, controlled, almost invisible. But over time, the treatments became more frequent. Her cheeks began to swell, her forehead tightened, and the natural movement in her face slowly disappeared. Fans noticed something was wrong when her expression started to look stiff, almost frozen, as if emotion couldn't fully break through the surface. Public reaction was swift and uncomfortable. Viewers struggled to recognize her. Headlines questioned what she had done. Side-by-side photos spread online dissecting every change. The woman once praised for her natural charm now faced criticism for looking artificial, trapped in the very youth she was chasing. Courtney eventually spoke out, admitting she'd gone too far. She confessed that the fillers made her look like someone she didn't recognize. In 2017, she made a rare Hollywood movie. She had her fillers dissolved and chose to embrace aging naturally. Her story stands as a rare moment of reflection in an industry that rarely pauses, proof that sometimes the bravest transformation is choosing to stop. Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke was once Hollywood's ultimate tough guy, rugged, magnetic, and impossibly charismatic. In the 1980s, his sharp cheekbones and strong jawline made him unforgettable. But unlike most on this list, Rourke's transformation didn't begin with vanity, it began with violence. Years of professional boxing left his face shattered. Broken nose, crushed cheekbones, severe trauma. To fix the damage, Mickey underwent a series of reconstructive surgeries, 5 nose operations alone, along with extensive work on his facial bones. What was meant to repair his face slowly reshaped it beyond recognition. Then came the cosmetic layer. Botox and fillers were added in an attempt to smooth and balance the reconstruction. Instead, his face became swollen and rounder, his cheekbones unnaturally full, his skin tight and stiff. The once hard edges of his face blurred into something unfamiliar. Public reaction was mixed but relentless. Some felt sympathy knowing his surgeries were medically necessary. Others were brutal, accusing him of ruining his own face. The criticism followed him everywhere, turning his appearance into a headline rather than his talent. Mickey eventually admitted the truth: he chose the wrong doctor. He regretted trusting someone who didn't understand how to rebuild what had been broken. Yet despite everything, he returned to the spot. Anastasia Pokryschuk. Anastasia Pokryschuk didn't stumble into controversy, she charged straight into it. Known online as the woman with the world's largest cheekbones, her transformation is impossible to ignore and even harder to forget. In her early 20s, Anastasia's look was soft, youthful, and relatively conventional. But that version of herself never felt enough. What began as modest filler quickly escalated into something extreme. Injection after injection, her cheeks expanded far beyond natural proportion, rising into sharp, inflated angles that now dominate her entire face. The contrast between her pre-surgery appearance and her current look is so dramatic that many viewers refuse to believe it's the same person. Her lips followed the same path, fuller, heavier, pushed to the edge of exaggeration. Fillers in her chin and jawline were added to balance her cheeks, locking her face into a sculpted, almost cartoon-like structure. The public response was explosive. Shock, confusion, outright mockery. Comment sections filled with disbelief, warnings, and accusations of self-destruction. But Anastasia never backed down. She openly admitted to performing some injections herself and insisted she loved the result. "Before I was a gray mouse," she said, "now I'm unique." While critics see disfigurement, Anastasia sees confidence. Her story forces an uncomfortable question: when transformation is intentional, extreme, and embraced, who gets to decide when it's gone too far? Igor and Grichka Bogdanov. Igor and Grichka Bogdanov were once admired for their sharp, aristocratic looks, strong jaws, high cheekbones, and an almost futuristic elegance that perfectly matched their science fiction television fame in 1970s France. Back then, they looked unusual in a charming way. Intelligent, striking, human. Then, in the late 1990s, something changed. At first, the differences were subtle enough to ignore. Slightly fuller cheeks, a sharper contour, but year by year their faces began to shift into something deeply unsettling. Their cheekbones rose higher and higher, unnaturally inflated as if pulled upward by invisible strings. Their chins elongated, their lips thickened. The symmetry that once defined them warped into exaggerated proportions that no longer obeyed anatomy. By the early 2000s, public appearances triggered global shock. Photos from red carpets, especially the Cannes Film Festival, spread rapidly online. Viewers stared in disbelief. Commentators struggled to find words. The label alien-like followed them everywhere, half joke, half genuine confusion. What made it even more disturbing was their response. The brothers repeatedly denied having cosmetic surgery, claiming their transformation was the result of scientific experimentation and technology. The explanation only deepened the mystery and the unease. Critics speculated about extreme fillers, implants, and repeated procedures gone far beyond reversal. Yet the Bogdanovs seemed untouched by the outrage. They leaned into the spectacle, smiling through the stares as if daring the world to look away. Their faces became their legacy, no longer remembered for science or television, but as one of the most surreal and controversial transformations ever witnessed. In the end, Igor and Grichka Bogdanov didn't just change their faces, they erased the line between fascination and fear and made the world question how far identity can be stretched before it becomes something else entirely. Raji Narina Singh. Raji Narina Singh's story is one of the most horrifying examples of what happens when desperation meets deception. In 2005, hoping to enhance her appearance and feel more confident, Raji turned to what she believed was a cosmetic professional offering affordable filler injections. What she received instead would permanently change her life. The so-called doctor injected her face with a toxic cocktail of cement tire sealant and mineral oil. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Then, the nightmare began. The substances hardened under her skin, forming painful lumps that twisted her face into unnatural shapes. Her cheeks, meant to look fuller and balanced, became bumpy and misshapen. Her skin tightened and pulled unevenly, leaving her nearly unrecognizable. The public reaction was cruel and immediate. Strangers stared, whispers followed her into rooms. Online comments cut deep, turning her face into a spectacle. Ashamed and terrified, Raji withdrew from public life, spending years in isolation, hiding from mirrors and cameras alike. Her turning point came when she appeared on Botched. Surgeons attempted to undo the damage, but the truth was devastating. Removing all the foreign material would be too dangerous. Some of it had fused permanently with her tissue. While multiple surgeries restored parts of her natural contours, especially around her jawline and cheeks, visible nodules remained. Raji survived, but not without scars. Today, she speaks openly about her ordeal, warning others about the deadly risks of black market cosmetic procedures. Her face tells a brutal story, not of vanity, but of trust betrayed and resilience forged in pain. Jocelyn Wildenstein. Jocelyn Wildenstein's face is one of the most infamous in modern celebrity culture, so extreme that the world stopped seeing a woman and started seeing a legend. Long before the nickname Catwoman followed her everywhere, Jocelyn was known for her natural beauty and elite social status. But during her marriage to billionaire art dealer Alec Wildenstein in the 1990s, everything changed. According to those close to the couple, Alec's obsession with wildcats planted the seed. Jocelyn began pursuing a feline-inspired look, sharper eyes, higher cheekbones, tighter skin. What started as cosmetic refinement quickly escalated into an endless cycle of surgery. Eyelid procedures pulled her eyes upward into a permanent slant. Cheek implants and heavy fillers carved her face into sharp, exaggerated contours. Facelifts tightened her skin so aggressively it appeared stretched, almost sculpted. Public reaction was relentless. Paparazzi photos spread worldwide, each one more shocking than the last. Headlines mocked, late-night shows joked. Online people stared in disbelief, struggling to connect the face they saw with the woman she once was. Yet Jocelyn remained defiant. She repeatedly denied excessive surgery, famously claiming her cat-like features came from her Swiss heritage. Despite spending millions on cosmetic procedures, Jocelyn never expressed regret. Even into her later years, she continued appearing at high-profile events, fully aware of the stares. Her transformation became a symbol of wealth without limits, beauty pushed past recognition, and the dangerous illusion that surgery can turn fantasy into reality without consequence. Igor and Grichka Bogdanov. Igor and Grichka Bogdanov were once admired for their sharp, aristocratic looks, strong jaws, high cheekbones, and an almost futuristic elegance that perfectly matched their science fiction television fame in 1970s France. Back then, they looked unusual in a charming way. Intelligent, striking, human. Then, in the late 1990s, something changed. At first, the differences were subtle enough to ignore: slightly fuller cheeks, a sharper contour, but year by year their faces began to shift into something deeply unsettling. Their cheekbones rose higher and higher, unnaturally inflated as if pulled upward by invisible strings. Their chins elongated, their lips thickened. The symmetry that once defined them warped into exaggerated proportions that no longer obeyed anatomy. By the early 2000s, public appearances triggered global shock. Photos from red carpets, especially the Cannes Film Festival, spread rapidly online. Viewers stared in disbelief. Commentators struggled to find words. The label alien-like followed them everywhere, half joke, half genuine confusion. What made it even more disturbing was their response. The brothers repeatedly denied having cosmetic surgery, claiming their transformation was the result of scientific experimentation and technology. The explanation only deepened the mystery and the unease. Critics speculated about extreme fillers, implants, and repeated procedures gone far beyond reversal. Yet the Bogdanovs seemed untouched by the outrage. They leaned into the spectacle, smiling through the stares as if daring the world to look away. Their faces became their legacy, no longer remembered for science or television, but as one of the most surreal and controversial transformations ever witnessed. In the end, Igor and Grichka Bogdanov didn't just change their faces, they erased the line between fascination and fear and made the world question how far identity can be stretched before it becomes something else entirely.